All right. And like I mentioned, we are working to get the interpreters set up, but welcome to the Institute for Disability Research Policy and Practice, Early Intervention ECHO. If you'll take a minute and put your name and contact information into the chat, just helps us with that networking and getting to know everybody on the call. As you notice, we are recording today's session. The videos and recordings are stored on our Canvas page. And by participating in today's session, you're consenting to being recorded. So thank you for joining us. We're always thrilled when you share information and put ideas and help us all learn from each other. Because like I say every time, there are so many amazing people on this call that have such knowledge and expertise. I love learning from all of you guys. And components of an echo session are three, and we will always have what we call our subject matter experts. And we're thrilled today to have one of our amazing hub members, Pat, present to us on sensory or behavior. So I'm really thrilled about that. And then my favorite part of an echo session is our case presentation and small breakout rooms. Again, just that learning from everybody on the call, different thoughts and ideas on kids and families that we work with. One, knowing new resources, or two, am I on the right track? So I always love it when I get to present a case of families that I'm working with, and it again just helps build that professional networking. I'll tell you a story about the professional networking. I was on a echo call, another one here at the Institute, and a new person moved to Utah, and she has reached out to me, and we are actually meeting for coffee this afternoon because she wanted to know a little bit more about autism in Utah. And so networking in echoes is really the cool thing about this echo. She lives down in Provo. I'm up here in northern Utah, and so I would have never met her otherwise. So I just think that's a cool opportunity. And that's really the interaction portion of echo. The more that you can connect with others, is why we ask you guys to put your contact information into the chat. So when Angela shares a wonderful resource in a breakout room, I know where she works at to send her an email and say, hey, tell me a little bit more about what you were talking about. Or I have this, can I brainstorm something with you? And so we do love those case narratives. If you're interested in submitting a case, please reach out to earlyecho@usu.edu, and we will get you set up on the schedule for that. Just like in any kind of situation, there is some etiquette, so when you're talking, make sure to introduce yourself, keep your questions brief and on topic, and as well as turning on your camera if you feel comfortable in doing that. It's always easier as a presenter to see faces versus those black screens. If we were in person, there's no way to mute us or turn off our faces. So that's one of the ways to keep this kind of connection over this virtual world. We do talk about families that we work with or clients that we serve. So just remember to protect their privacy, de-identify any information. If you have any questions, you can reach out to a hub member. We all have an asterisk, or we'll now have that remembering to put an asterisk in front of our name. Just makes us easier to find in chat if you have any questions or things that you want to discuss. Throughout today's session, we will be dropping in a survey link. Thank you to everybody who always fills out those survey links. We really do take the information that you guys share in those surveys and develop the Echo Network around what you guys are hoping to learn and what you want to learn. So thank you to complete those who complete those surveys. And that's how we email our certificate of attendance. Um, so, like I said, they'll be dropped in throughout today. Just another plug for case studies. It's a great way to just get information from colleagues and everybody on the call about cases that we're working with. So, without further ado, I'm going to stop talking and turn the time over to Pat and let her take over. And Pat, you're on mute. There you go.
I've got to unmute and then make the screen smaller. So I'm Pat Boyle, and the topic today is it sensory or is it behavior? Can everybody hear? Am I loud enough?
Yep, I
Okay,
think you're good.
good. Okay, so it's going to be a different take on the traditional is it sensory or is it behavior? So bear with me. There's my experience. I'm an old person, but I've worked in a variety of different pediatric environments. The most predominant has been in the NICU, special care nurseries, level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4 NICUs. So I have had a lot of time to observe infant behavior and their sensory system. I have no conflicts. Um, So let's jump in. Today's presentation will focus on the developing infant and how their sensory world shapes their reactions, actions, and conduct in response to internal and external stimuli. The study of human behavior encompasses many professions. Behavior can be overt with observable reactions such as laughing, crying, hitting, or running, and it can be covert and not observable, like emotions, thought, memory, even physiological expressions like heart rate, nausea, and respiratory rate. It can be measurable with appropriate instrumentation. Oh, somebody say something? No. It can be measurable with appropriate instrumentation via heart and respiratory monitors, blood pressure monitors, and developmental evaluations. And it's not going to let me do this. Okie dokie. When I first heard this phrase, is it sensory or is it behavior? I reacted defensively on behalf of the children I serve. I thought sensory was who they were and how they perceived and felt their world. I felt that categorizing behavior in a negative way misrepresented how they communicate. The behavior was inappropriate and the child was being reacted to negatively because of their behavior. I've always had a problem with behavioral programs. The programs seem to just target the behavior and not the why the behavior exists. And just to preface it, it's in my realm. It was behavioral feeding programs, strategies like waiting until a child got hungry, timing feeding, limiting feeding, and reward feeding. They're all not embracing the child's cues and nutritional needs, and more specifically, the medical, digestive, and motor issues that may be limiting function. So the focus today is on how the infant communicates with their behavior via sensory input. There are a lot of newborn evaluations, some standardized, some norm reference, checklists, screeners. The New York Department of Health listed 101 evaluation tools available for their EI population in May of 2025. Most of these tools are focused on dysfunction and identifying needs. Few are strength-based or focused on the ability of the infant and how those strengths relate to parent-infant relationships. Since this is typical development, I really wanted to focus on how these behaviors emerge via sensory input in the young infant. So, relationships. A focus on our newborn nurseries is to promote relationships. If you've had a baby recently, most of them are single room. You're pretty much left on your own. Your nurse comes in and checks you a little bit. And those are the nurseries that I've been going to, and they're lovely. And the whole idea is for you to figure out your kid. So what strengths does the infant and caregiver have? How does sensory input given to the infant promote clear behavioral communication with their parent? So there are two assessment tools that I love. One is the NBAS, which is the Neonatal Behavioral Assessment Scale, and the NBO, which is Newborn Behavioral Observations. So this is the Neonatal Behavioral Assessment by T. Barry Brazelton and Kevin Nugent. And this is what they're doing.
Having come from a primitive look at babies in the 50s, where we didn't think babies showed us anything, they were lumps of clay. All the greats in our past history said they didn't think babies were people until they were 3 or 4 months and had been shaped by the environment. Where did we get such a stupid idea? I began to look for a model then that ended up as my newborn assessment scale.
Dr. Barry Brazelton of Harvard Medical School had observed that even newborns connect to what happens around them.
Isn't it amazing that their visual apparatus is all ready to go at birth?
That even at this very young age, we can already see the emergence of the skill of focus and self-control. He developed the Neonatal Behavioral Assessment Scale as a tool to help adults tune into what the infants were doing.
First thing I'd like to show you is how Isabella can shut out disturbing things like too much light, too much noise.
This baby, only hours old, can tune out these intrusions on her peaceful sleep.
I think one thing that we don't give them credit for is how much they regulate themselves. Now let's see if she's. See her legs move. Their arm moves. Her head moves. And she smiles. Can you see her breathing? I could go on rattling for the rest of the day and she wouldn't respond. But she's gotten into what I call a habituated sleep state. She put herself to sleep so she doesn't have to respond every time. They can shut out repeated noises. They can shut out repeated flashes of light to stay asleep. So they work very hard at staying asleep. That's lovely. Suppose I pick you up and play with you. Would you do it? Oh my goodness, Gladys. And what I'm watching right now is to see how she calms herself down. And she yawns. She brings her feet up. She pulls her hand up to her mouth. And what I'd like is to let her get a little upset and then see if she'll calm down to some of the things I can do. Isabella, what you fussing about? What you fussing about? That was so nice. You take my voice and calm right down. And so the regulation that we see in infancy is how does the baby handle coming from sleep to awake, coming back down again, staying under control in order to watch, to listen, to interact. And I think they're learning through sensitive adult handling how to put themselves together.
So I can watch that particular video forever. So that was T. Barry Brazelton. He was a mentor of mine. He unfortunately didn't live until 100. He died in, I think, 2018 at the age of 99, still working. He began his observations of newborns and wrote the first edition in 1973 with the final edition in 2011. So this has a 53 scoreable items. It looks at the 6 distinct behavioral states, which are states that babies go through, such as deep sleep, fussing, crying. And the most important thing is looking at the transitions between these states. It looks at the baby's behavioral repertoire as they respond to human and non-human sensory input. Habituation and hypersensitivity are pointed out to the parent as they become partners in this observation. It can be used on newborns from 35 weeks gestation until 12 months. It assumes that the infants are highly capable at birth. They already have 9 months of experience prior to birth, and they're ready to communicate via their behavior. Finally, their communication is not random or predictable. Then the newborn behavioral observation was later developed by Kevin Nugent et al. And it is an interesting tool because it is a relationship-based tool that offers individualized information to parents about their baby's communication strategies and overall development. The goal is to strengthen that parent-infant relationship. The NBO describes the infant's capacities in such a way that parents can begin to see their baby as a person and learn to understand and respond to their baby in a way that meets the baby's unique developmental needs. It consists of 18 neurobiological or neurobehavioral elements, and these are some of the elements that they're looking at that you score. Including the tracking that you saw Dr. Brazelton doing, looking at their soothability, looking at their activity level, but all with the parent and having the parent reference back to them what is going on. So it was developed after the NBAS as a tool to be used by a variety of professionals. Unfortunately, you need to be certified in it, as you do with the NBAS, but it's not like you can't take away some of these items and bring them into your practice with your newborn babies as a family-centered, very, very parent-specific to enhance that parent-infant interaction and strengthen the relationship. So again, these are the environments that it has been used in. Most of the studies I'm getting are out of Europe that are using it. And I think it is used back east, but we use variations of it in our newborn assessments when I go to a mom baby or a level 1 NICU to evaluate a baby. These are 2 RCTs that looked at the effects of the MBO. And the first one was in Iceland, and it was looking at risk families, and the actual study group were able to identify very accurately their baby's behaviors as it related to vision, hearing, touch. And the next one was in mental health, and I think this was in Denmark, that again, parents were able to more identify what their babies were communicating to them. So Dr. Brazelton has mentioned 3 different infant types. Again, he emphasizes that they're born with distinct behavioral styles rather than a blank slate. And these styles or temperaments need to be recognized early and respected in order to support development. So you got your quiet baby, your active baby, and then your middle of the road baby. And then I'm sure there's little ones that fall on either side of all of it. But the quiet baby sometimes can be concerning, as can the active baby. And it's up to the parents to figure out how to engage and support that relationship. Dr. Brazelton wrote a book, Touch Points, and he identified touch points as a universal phenomena in development, which are predictable in all areas of development just before that rapid surge of skill. So baby's behavior momentarily just falls apart. They may regress, act fussy, lose sleep, or become clingy. And the child may regress in other areas of development. Problems occur when the parents attempt to control situations that really belong to the child. These are natural maturation events rather than troublesome behavior issues, and the parent should be supported in how they positively respond to challenging behaviors. So looking at our sensory system, the biggest thing here is just because an infant's responsiveness to stimulus does not mean it was received, perceived, needed, or beneficial. And Blackburn, a nurse practitioner, says much of what we stimulate an infant with may not be needed. So sort of the rules of sensory development is out of sequence stimulation of one system can interfere with development in that system and in others. If vision is stimulated too early when hearing is developing, Both systems may be altered. Poorly timed or excessive vestibular movement or lack of proprioceptive input can cause delays in motor movements and therefore interfere with the interoceptive, causing excessive nausea and reflux. Light touch, tickling touch, or cold hands could interfere with state control and also interfere and disturb the child's ability to accept touch. Supporting parents in their observation of their infant sensory system responses allows for mutual respect and advocacy in this relationship. You, the parent, are the expert in your journey. And the one thing I leave with parents when I leave the room after evaluating their baby, especially if they've got grandmothers and aunts and uncles, and I usually kick them out for the eval, I said, if it doesn't feel right, don't do it. And parents feel they feel powerful when you tell them to just follow their gut. So vision, again, and term, it's immature. It changes rapidly over the next 6 months. They see, they attend to form, object, face. They track horizontally and some vertically. They see between 2.5 feet. It's best at like your 8 to 12 inches. And they prefer humans. They prefer, obviously, bright objects, movement. A study was done, and I love Gravin and Joy Voiles Brown. They've done a lot of visual and auditory research. And it was a study that correlated poor reaching patterns in high-risk preterm infants with delayed development at 12 months. So increased visual attention to lights, black and white patterned objects is associated with lower IQ. Excessive visual stimulation in infancy interferes with normal auditory dominance in the newborn period and interferes with the emergence of hand regard and visually directed reaching. And I'm talking about typical kids. I'm not talking about our preterm infants. I'm talking about you can overwhelm these very, very sensitive systems. Use of visually overwhelming toys may impact orientation of the newborn to voice and ultimately affect eye contact. So again, the human face is the most important visual toy. Visual stimulation is dangerous. Initial visual responsiveness is to contrast, light, and movement. And that's the where response in that newborn infant. It's where is it? It's visual information that's going in. But processing that information is months away. The what response is cortically mediated and responsible for subtle contrast, color, and form perception. And my best example is a bottle that I have taped black and white tape on. And you shake that bottle in front of the newborn baby and they orient to it and look at the black and white. 2 to 3 months down the line, especially if they've been fed with that bottle, you show that bottle to the baby and they know the what. So they know that's what I eat with. Visual processing problems are more subtle and linked to cognitive delay. Infants have intact where responses, but those what responses are limited. They have poor pattern discrimination, poor visual memory, and poor visual motor integration. So hearing, a little bit of in utero, they're hearing really well. By the time they're 30 to 34 weeks, they're able to localize and discriminate. And this is in utero, and obviously when I've seen babies in the NICU. And they have high frequency stimulation in the NICU, and there's no gradation or modulation of that input. So the infant is unable to modulate their state or movement in response to noise. And some infants may become overstimulated, but the kids I worry about the most are the ones that shut down by habituating to the noise, and they miss an opportunity to support auditory processing. And interestingly, if lights are low, an infant will attend auditorily, and if sound is low, the infant will attend visually. So hearing, they locate and discriminate. Their preferences are mother's voice, female voice, high-pitched sound, which is why we talk to babies in such a high-pitched orienting voice. Again, it's gradual. They have a fluid-filled space, and until they dry out, they have had fluid and tissue-conducted sound versus air-conducted sound. And the intrauterine sounds of low frequency versus the extrauterine sounds. So it's a change from what they're used to hearing. Vestibular in utero, it's closely linked to receptors in the inner ear. Movement is a fluid, gravity-eliminated environment, and it is beneficial and very, very important to develop bone, joint, muscle, and alignment of those bones and joints. And you see deformities like arthrogryposis or amniotic fluid issues, and therefore no movement, and therefore really interesting joint and muscle development. So by 30 weeks, it's very mature in utero, ex utero, but the individual responses to movement vary, especially since the infant has a difficult time with self-initiated movements. And so again, the movements of mom are very important when she's pregnant with that baby. So at birth, totally intact, the vestibular system located in the inner ear controls balance, spatial awareness, and head control. In babies, safe movements like gentle rocking, tummy time, or bouncing stimulate the system and lay the foundation for rolling, sitting, and walking. The newborn infant does not have the protective or righting reactions developed, which help them react to having their head moved in space. Placing an infant into a car seat, into a crib, or a bouncy chair may require having their head in a side-lying or neutral position to support this transition. And helping parents to support their infant during movement transitions allows the infant to adjust to various head positions during movement. So touch is intact. So by 25 to 28 weeks, we have our palmar, plantar, and galant reflexes, which are touch reflexes. Rooting is emerging. And again, the skin is the largest organ in the body. It is responsible for receptors that process deep touch, light touch, temperature, pain. And they utilize touch as they move around and against the uterine wall. So at birth, though, they've really only experienced deep proprioceptive input or deep touch. So again, we need to be careful with how we touch. Smell and taste. Your amniotic fluid has many different tastes from what mom has recently eaten. They're swallowing. They respond to odorants just before 30 weeks gestation, and they will have preferences just before 38 weeks of gestation. And these are survival implications. They recognize their own mother. It stimulates attachment, sucking behavior, and there's multiple receptors for smell, again, starting at 11 weeks. And by 16 to 20 weeks, when the nasal plugs disappear, they're smelling. And they prefer and recognize smells in utero along with taste. So this is just a repetition. So again, do smell and taste, yeah, it supports early recognition of their mom. It enhances that attachment, which is why skin to skin is so vital after they're born. And so many of the little ones I see do not get this initial support due to a variety of issues that occur in our NICUs. So interoception. The interoceptive system allows us to feel our bodily functions. There are nerve receptors in our organs, bones, muscles, and skin, which communicate with brain receptors, which allow us to feel hunger, temperature, nausea, pain, tiredness, the need to urinate, stool, and emotions. It allows us to stay in balance. So modulation difficulties with interoception can affect behavior. A child may be overreactive or underreactive within the system. Pain may be felt more acutely or not at all. A child may be aware of internal changes, but not be able to process what or where the sensations are coming from. And this affects hunger, satiation, the need to stool or urinate. Anxiety or confusion with these signals may affect behavior. And this is in our typical developing child. The initial attempts to establish toilet learning are thwarted by the child's initial inability to feel the need to stool or urinate. Responding to the need to sleep may only cause the child to disregard those signals by running, jumping, yelling, and otherwise ignoring the need to sleep. So this is a really, really good resource. I love the STAR Institute. It's in Colorado, and it was originally started by Lucy Jane Miller, who was one of my professors when I did my doctor of physical therapy. And she's incredible. But this stuff is free to download, and it gives a pretty in-depth sort of descriptive of what your 8 senses are. And then Murray Slutsky and Paris came up with this: is it sensory or is it behavior? So non-sensory undesirable behavior happens when a child is trying to get something they want or need, such as a treat or seeking attention. Oh, did I get a question?
Yeah, that's weird.
What's weird?
I think somebody has their
Oh, well, turn it off. Okay, so I'm just reiterate what normal sort of non-sensory undesirable behaviors can be. So it happens when a child is avoiding, oh gosh, a situation. I was going to change that one, not a saturation, an activity or escaping uncomfortable or unpleasant feelings. It happens in front of an audience. The child may stop in the middle of a tantrum to make sure you're still looking and paying attention to them. The undesirable behavior is happening for a reason, and the child has some control over the behavior. Once the child has gotten what they want or learns the behavior will not be reinforced, it usually gets extinguished. And when is it a sensory behavior? Sensory behaviors happen as a reaction to something such as too much sensory information or feeling overwhelmed. And how many of your children, you take them out, you go to somebody, a big party, and they just dissolve? And that's normal. They've had it. And you need to get out of there. The child is not looking for attention. The sensory behavior will continue even without an audience. The sensory behavior will only cease once the child has calmed down or has received help to regain control. Sensory behavior occur as a coping strategy to block out disorganized and overstimulating sensory information or to seek sensory input. Sensory behaviors may appear as tantrums or avoidance behavior, and removing them from the environment is also beneficial. Okay, so I want to delve into my world, and my world is a level 4 NICU with a lot of really sick kids. And a lot of these kiddos are over a year. They may have been previous 23-weekers, but they're still in the hospital. And this is called the Behavioral Signs of Respiratory Instability, the BSRI. And it's a tool that therapists use in the NICU to represent the child to, say, the pulmonologist, to the neonatologist, the nurse practitioner, to represent the child to the parent and say, okay, let's look at what your child can do during some of these developmental activities and at what cost is there to the respiratory system. So it's a tool developed by Nationwide Children's Hospital in 2016, and it's considered the best BPD or bronchopulmonary dysplasia center in the nation. It was developed to be an objective measure of the developmental capacity of a child with significant respiratory compromise during developmental handling. And just to reiterate, this is an internal response affecting behavior. A study in 2023 said the BSRI may provide accurate objective data that can help improve care planning within interdisciplinary teams that supports brain growth and potentially improves neurodevelopment. So best case example, you've got a little guy, he's 3 months old, and he's just lingering on high flow nasal cannula, and the parent wants him down, the pulmonologist wants him down, everybody wants him down, but he's not on board. So they were rapidly weaned to 2-liter flow of oxygen, which is when we can start feedings in the NICU, but rapidly weaned down from 8 liters, and their function rapidly deteriorates. And the BSRI will demonstrate this. So tachypnea, which is respiratory distress, is a behavioral cue. So rapid breathing is a behavioral cue. As the child's respiratory status deteriorates, it can drastically alter how a full-term infant interacts with their environment. And so there's 5 areas in this BSRI. You all have access to it via the handouts that are online. It looks at interaction. It looks like midline position, sitting, which is and their extensor movements in sitting. It looks at tachypnea and the work of breathing. And the scores are from 0 to 10. 10 indicates the child can engage in those developmental activities, and a 0 reveals a cost to development activities when respiration is compromised. And the scores vary between 1 and 9. And these are communicated to the neonatologist and nurse practitioner on sometimes a daily, if not weekly basis. The scoring system facilitates developmental planning, but it's also an excellent tool to communicate competencies to parents and physicians. Both can see the higher level of respiratory support. Both can see a higher level of respiratory support, or even a tracheostomy is needed to help the child. And the caveat here is if you can't breathe, you can't function. And this goes home with the child into our early intervention programs. And often I will see children who their breathing rate is costing them. And you may think they're lazy, you may think they're profoundly developmentally delayed and or even visually delayed. So the interaction piece of it is the child, this is the first one, the child may be swaddled or may not, and they're always in supine or flat on their back. And this is a child between 3 and 6 months. And all you're asking them to do is visually track in a vertical and horizontal plane 3 out of 3 times at the onset as you go in to do your treatment. And they get a score of 2 if they can do it. They get a score of 1 if they can only do it 1 out of 3, and a score of 0 if they're unable to trap horizontally or vertically. And some of these kids won't even give you eye contact. So they are compromised from a respiratory point of view. Then our next boo at developmental assessment is your sensory profile. And I know I've done Winnie Dunn's course a gazillion years ago, and she had the older one that I think was 36 months to 14 years, and then she developed the infant sensory profile as well as the toddler sensory profile. And I actually love these tools because you can do it with the parent, and you can point out activities that the child, maybe this is what we need to work on, and it's not a one and done. It's like, let's keep visiting this. So the reason why is there was an autism study done, and it was in Italy, of course, differentiating early sensory profiles in toddlers at elevated likelihood of autism in association with later clinical outcome and diagnosis. So the study looked at siblings of those who already, so the sibling had, an older sibling had been diagnosed with ASD. So it looked at 116 toddlers, 56 males, 60 females, average age 16.48 months, and the sensory profile 2 was used. The study cited and it reported that atypical sensory responsiveness emerges during the first months of life, and early patterns of sensory processing may produce effects on later social communication skill and restricted and repetitive behaviors by the age of 2. So it showed 3 sensory sensitivities in 3 areas of that had a significant role. It was hyperresponsiveness, hyporesponsiveness, and sensory seeking. And interestingly, hyperresponsiveness became more pronounced between 12 and 24 months in those children who were later diagnosed with ASD. And it was decreased in children without a later autistic diagnosis. At the same time, hypo-responsiveness and sensory seeking behaviors decreased in neurotypical infants and infant siblings of autistic children, not themselves diagnosed with ASD between 12 and 24 months. So it supported the need to examine sensory patterns. Sensory differences are associated with developmental outcomes, and the need for early intervention is constantly emphasized. So I think, in summary, an appreciation for how subtle early infant communication behavior is. It's subtle, and the onus is on us as interventionists to facilitate that parent's understanding of that subtleness and feed it back to us and let us know how we can help. How vital the supporting the infant and parent relationship is. Intervention, knowing that overstimulation of infant sensory systems can perhaps cause developmental issues. Intervention, knowing that understimulation of infant sensory systems can perhaps cause developmental issues. And having the appropriate tools, assessments, and information to guide these relationships and developments. So this was developed by Lindsay Beale. I reached out to her, and you have this on one of your handouts. And I really like it because you can just sit down with the parent and say, how does your kid react to this? It's literally an interventionist and parent tool. So she said, please, and it says here for personal use only, but I emailed her and she said, I can share this. So you guys have it. And then also, this is on the STAR website, a detailed descriptive of our hidden sense. And then I want to show you this. So the baby's moving a lot. And there's lots of talking. The deep voice is his dad's. And he's kicking. He's 10 weeks old. Kicking. And then somebody, turn the volume down. Somebody turns the TV on and the fireplace on. And what happens to his movement? He stops. He says, oh, inappropriate visual input. Do I really need to see this screen? And then you say, okay, let's put that block back up. Experiment there. And as soon as you give him access to his TV, he stops moving. He stops doing all. I'm trying to educate people here. As soon as he looks at the TV, he says, oh, there I go. I'm starting to move. And then I'm going to reflux. So I love this video. And then this is a video of me showing a parent for the very first time how to move their naked baby out of a crib into their arms in order to be bathed. And I think it would be nice, there's no sound. I just want you to reflect on what sensory system is being supported and stimulated, and what is the behavioral response. And I know my big body is in the way. I apologize. So again, just observing. We always put the baby down on their side. Check in, see how they're doing. And now I'm going to take over the videotaping while Dad can get involved. And Mom thinks she's stable enough to be turned over on her back. So we are in a really noisy NICU room. There's a ton of noise. And there's obviously lights, bright lights. And Dad's doing the camera, so I apologize. But I just want to focus on the child's capabilities, what the child's communicating. And when you dip water or the blanket into hot water and put it over the baby, it gives them more deep proprioceptive input. And then Mom begins. Dad's doing all this light tactile touch. Love it. But they're being parents, which I just love. And away they go. So there's a lot more to this, but just what the baby's reaction. So summary, how can we use what we know about sensory processing to better understand our child's behavior? So references, lots of references. And then do I stop screen sharing?
Yes, sure.
I did. So
Okay.
any questions, hit me. And I did it with 8 minutes to spare.
Here he goes. So if anybody wants to put those questions or come off, raise your hand. I'll call on you if you have any questions for Pat. You did a great job, Pat.
Not what you were expecting. Sorry.
It was perfect. What do you mean? I'm never expecting anything.
From me. Yeah, so the whole point of this is how can we help our parents? And many of you are going into babies, babies with Down syndrome, right out of the nursery. And there are so many tools that you can use to help that relationship and enable that parent, especially when they're scared. And strength, focus is all I ever want to do. So.
Okay, well, if there are no questions, then okay, there is one. Have you followed any of these children in any studies?
Not in any studies. It's very anecdotal, but for a long time I was following children out of the NICU into early intervention, and I discharged a lot of kids because they were so supported in their sensory journey. Obviously, that's not true with so many of the kiddos we see. I think I think my biggest peeve is labeling behavior as wrong. And it's not wrong. The kid is trying to communicate. They're just trying to, and it's the onus is on us to figure out what we are doing wrong. And I know many of you work with children that are 2 and 3 that are truly have a lot of heavy duty behaviors. And we're going to see that from Janelle's case study. But as far as following them, I just know the success of making the parent the partner in this relationship. And I see some strengths in parents that a traditional focus you would not get. And the focus being, you do what I say, this is what you do, rather than, what do you think about this? Is this working for you? So, because I started many, many decades ago on a different journey than I have ended up. So I think we just need to help our parents be parents and then back off.
And I think that's a really valid point, helping parents be parents. Lots of times the kids don't come with these rule books, and we don't know exactly what to do as parents. And I think that's one of our role as providers is to help them navigate that journey. So, okay. There. Okay, there's one more question. It says, can you spend a minute to give examples of supports you would suggest to support sensory development that can be shared with parents?
Well, the biggest one I find is vestibular. I think that we pick our babies up from supine. Their heads are like, oh my gosh, what did you just do to me? And that whole pull to sit test should be thrown out the book. I think we really overwhelm our children's sensory systems. So the very first thing parents will say to me, I'm having a horrible time getting them into their crib. They're nice and cozy and skin to skin. I then pick them up. They're on their back. I lay them down and they wake up. Well, of course they wake up. You've just stimulated their vestibular system. So I like to get them over onto their side. I wish I had my dolls. I'm literally not at home. I am without all of my supports. So I get my doll or I get my baby and I turn them into side lying. And it's a very sandwiched approach. And I very linear, so in that same linear way, I put them down onto their side in their crib, down on their side in the car seat, in the bouncer chair, any other device that you're putting them in, even onto the floor, and then slowly roll them over because I know back to sleep is very important. So slowly roll them over, keep them contained, and then let go. And I have literally So anecdotal, yeah, I've had parents that say that's a miracle thing that you just told me. My kid's now sleeping in their crib. Vision supports, I just get rid of the ones that are full of lights and noises. They're horrible inputs. Many years ago, somebody thought it was a good idea to put iPads on these children's beds they're 6, 12, 18 months old, still in the NICU. And what happened was their visual system was so overstimulated, they wouldn't give eye contact. They wouldn't look at a three-dimensional toy. All they wanted was that iPad. And so I am such a negative screen exposure. Do not expose your children to screens. I really don't care if you're watching soccer, if you're watching football, that kid is going to look at that screen and they will not look at you and they will not look at their environment. Hearing, the same thing. We need to be supportive of their hearing because, again, they habituate, which is good, but then if they habituate so that they just stop ignoring you, then that's not good either. Touch systems, we need our firm touch. I hate tickling. Tickling is sensory abuse. And I think that a lot of people don't understand. The child is laughing and getting engaged, but are they? Are they sending out a cue that this isn't comfortable? So yeah, there's a lot of sensory supports out there, and it's just I don't go in and go, you should never do this. It is try this, see if it works. So that's sort of my gig.
Right. And then Lucia, hopefully I said your name right. You want to come off mute?
Yes, hi. Hi, Pat. Thank you so much. I feel that you need to come back and teach us some more subjects broken down. I'm a pediatrician. I
Oh,
appreciate you. I'm a lactation consultant, IBCLC, but I'm also certified in perinatal mental health. Can you tell us how will you approach the mother that is postpartum, whether the baby is in the NICU or not, the mom is in the floor, but that there is a detachment both from wanting to lactate, but also the safety factors when she goes home. How do you approach this mom that doesn't seem to have that connection with the baby? And thank you.
oh, you're welcome. Well, I get called into level 1 hospitals to see children who won't eat, who won't either take a bottle, won't suck on a pacifier, and definitely are not engaged with latch. So I do my assessment and I do it in front of the parent always. And then I see what that child's function is, and then I hand that kid over to the parent. And before I leave, they know how to latch appropriately. They know how to, oh gosh, my time's up. Um, sorry. They know how to put the baby to breast. But again, I'm always referencing with them, how do you feel? What do you think your baby's telling you? And it's not, I know what that baby's telling. That baby should probably be transported to a higher level of care, is what I'm thinking. But I want the ownership of that baby because they maybe the baby had to be resuscitated. Maybe they needed a little bit of CPAP. They probably might have had a stressful birth. Mom may have been cut wide open and feeling like crap. And I get it because I walk into these situations, they're day 1, day 2 of life, and all I can do is give that baby back to them. And I usually kick out all the relatives because all of that unnecessary input going into their brain is not necessary. So their support person and that mom is all I want to work with. And so I unswaddle their baby. I put them naked on their chest with a diaper, of course. I really try and engage that parent because it is so hard. I've heard the nurses say, Mom doesn't care. She doesn't, well, you haven't given her a chance to care. You haven't given her the strategies. Bathing the baby for the first time should be a parent activity. I mean, I look back to 40 years ago when the nurses had them in the nursery and they were holding them under the sinks and washing them under a sink. And it's like both the baby and me were stressed watching it. So I think it's handing it back. But I've seen all different scenarios, and I really think engaging that parent and then calling in social work if there's a true mental health issue, because there can be. I mean, postpartum is miserable and it can be really miserable. And follow up in the home. That's my biggest criticism of the status of our birth-in hospitals right now is we kick them out, 24 hours, 48 hours. Maybe you can stay for 3 days after a C-section. And the follow-up is, going back to the pediatrician's office. Well, that's why we need our home visitors in the home. And assessing the situation and facilitating relationships. And that NBO would really help. It would really help if our home visitors could just sit down with mom and point out her baby's strengths. Sorry, talk too much.
Perfect.
Excellent.
Thank you. There was one follow-up question about your screens. And it is asking, how long would you recommend no screens? I know as long as possible, but do you have an opinion about when it's vital to not have screens?
I do not think a child that is learning three-dimensional play should be seeing screens, and because they see you on your phone. Fortunately, you don't have to watch TV, but they see you on the phone, and the phone, they look at the parent on the phone and they say, oh, well, that's a really important thing. Maybe I want to get involved in it. I don't think kids need to be on screens before they're 2. And then even then, it's like something cute, like I love Daniel Tiger. I just discovered Daniel Tiger because he talks about feelings. Anyway, I really am an anti-screen person.
Yes, that is true, Pat. I'll attest to that.
Okay.
She gripes every time we have to get on this Zoom call, but we appreciate her so much for it. So, okay. Well, I'm going to go ahead and talk about the kids. The kids that I'm presenting today are a little bit older kids. Both of them are already receiving services, and their teams have implemented several strategies. Some have helped and others have limited success. Both of the families are really engaged and responsive and consistently follow through with any recommendations. Neither child has been diagnosed, but they have been referred to early intervention because of developmental concerns and challenges participating in everyday routines. And I'm sure as I talk about these kids, all of you have experienced a kid like this. And so the first one is Ethan. Ethan is 24 months. He attends early Head Start, and his parents really say he's a happy, affectionate little kiddo who's constantly moving. The teachers report that he frequently climbs on furniture, crashes into soft surfaces, seeks physical contact with peers, and has difficulty staying with the group during activities. At home, he rarely sits through a mealtime or books and becomes upset when asked to stop a preferred activity. His early intervention team has encouraged opportunities for movement throughout the day, including heavy work activities such as pushing a laundry basket or carrying items. They've suggested visual and verbal transition warnings, and the parents report that movement activities help for a short period of time, but that the transitions remain difficult and they continue to happen regularly. So both parents of Ethan's work full time and are feeling exhausted to keep him safe, engaged, and regulated throughout the day. Now we also have Sophia. She has a occupational therapist on her team, and due to some sensory processing and participation in daily routines. She's 20 months old, and her parents describe her as quiet, observant toddler who loves books and spending time with familiar adults. She gets overwhelmed by loud noises, crowded environments, and messy textures. She doesn't like certain clothing. She covers her ears during the early Head Start. She withdraws from activities, cries. They've recommended a calming space using reducing headphones. Sophie's family reports that the calming space and headphones have been helpful, but she continues to avoid messy play. The Sophia's family has started to decline invitations to community events because they anticipate meltdowns, and they're starting to worry about her missing out on experiences. They've also received some conflicting advice from family and friends, saying that she'll grow out of it or that she just needs more exposure to challenging situations. So the family themselves are really wondering what are some things that I can do to tell if my child's behavior is related to sensory needs or typical behavior. What are some simple strategies I can use at home to help my child be more comfortable? And I mentioned earlier, they both tried some of the strategies with mixed success. And so they're wondering, what do we do when a strategy works for a while, but then seems to stop helping? Both of these kids are in the same early Head Start classroom. And so the team from Early Head Start has reached out and wants to know is what are some of those what coaching or support might they use to help families feel more confident and successful in those everyday routines. So those are questions. Like I said, I'm sure that as I was describing those kids, all of us had 5 or 6 kids on our caseload that we've worked with in the past that came to mind. And so, Tori, if you want to go ahead and open those breakout groups. Hub members, you have all gotten your case question. And I'm going into 4. Is that correct, Tori?
Yes, Janelle, that is correct.
Okay.
And if anyone has any questions as they're trying to get to their breakout rooms or hub members, please let me know. I would be happy to answer them. Alrighty, I think everyone just should have been popped back in.
All right. Heather, how about we start with your group?
Yeah, you bet. So we were talking about, what to do when we've, been trying some regulation. So again, some things from our sensory toolbox, and then all of a sudden it appears they're no longer working. So some things we talked about is, just that consistency piece, but also recognizing there could be something else going on behind the scenes we're not paying attention to that may be making that particular activity that particular day not as effective, or even that particular week, right? So that child may not be feeling well. That child may be hangry. And then also thinking about that, just like any of us, the novelty can wear off. So really thinking about having many different tools in our sensory toolbox to help that child with regulation, to keep things interesting.
Great, wonderful. All right. Pat, I see you next. What did your one thing from your group?
We didn't know what question to answer, so we answered them all.
Sweet. Great. One idea from your group, Pat.
So I was pretty impressed with the responses. Minot was heavily represented, so bravo. And a lot of the stuff was you have to look at the context of the child and their behavior. And, do they feel safe and secure? What went before? And rather than focusing on it's just not working, And so looking at schedules, is a child aware of what their day is going to be? Is there a vision board and communication? They want to know whether your kiddos can talk. Can they?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So they can reference, they can give you what's going on.
I think yes. Mm-hmm.
So I was really impressed with all of these responses, and I will write them out probably within the next 2 months and send them to you.
Sweet. Nice. I love that. That's about how I get them to everybody too. Okay, Rebecca, we're going to take your group.
Okay, so we talked about some of the things that Pat just mentioned with the environment and communication. And then we did spend a fair bit of time talking about using the sensory profile as a way of assessing the sensory needs of the child, as well as using it as a way to teach parents about what's typical sensory responses and what might be outside the ordinary. And then we touched a little bit too on using some type of social emotional development assessment tool as well.
And isn't that great? Because a few months ago, we did learn all about that social emotional map, and we had some of those great resources from everybody too. So I'm going to just call it good on that. Leo, yours and my group didn't get to go. So if you're dying to know what our group talked about, go ahead and get on our Canvas page, and all of those will be compiled. Because like I said, we've all had families or clients that are pretty similar in this, so we can all use those resources. Our next session will be September 2nd. And our amazing Rebecca Foster will be presenting on this about teaching parents about a sensory diet. So looking forward to that, and thank you, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon.